Hello and welcome to Just Keep Writing,
a podcast for writers
by writers
to keep you writing.
I'm Marshall.
I'm Nick.
I'm Brent.
And I'm Will.
Okay, so I am actually going to be manning the ship today for this episode. We are circling back to Will's webcomic, The Vessel. So the first time around, we just kind of covered a broad overview of what the comic was about, and some of this process in actually creating a webcomic. So this time, much as what we did with Unnecessary Chaos months ago, we're going to do an episode that focuses on the world building of The Vessel, and I come up with some questions around that. I feel like I'm starting to get the world building brand attached to me, so this is fun. I get to ask these kind of questions of someone else for a change. All right, so Will, right out the gate, here's my first question for you. So, what influences were at the top of your mind when you were creating the town of Wildwood? These can be real or fictional influences. And I do have one influence that I kind of want to point out, or at least I think I might be similar, but I'm going to let you answer first, and then I'll point out what I saw when I was reading it.
Gotcha. Well, Wildwood is a real place at the Jersey Shore in South Jersey. It's 30 minutes from Atlantic City. And my family, my oldest sister has a place in Ocean City, which is even closer. It's 20-minute drive from there. But Wildwood used to be a place that we went to as kids. And I think a lot of times when people think of the Jersey Shore, they think of the show The Jersey Shore, which I just want to say there's a big difference between North and South Jersey. And the kids on the Jersey Shore, they're not kids anymore, they were actually from Staten Island. And not to throw shade, but it's a very different culture.
But I also found out some stuff about Jersey Shore that I was oh, this is clock that. That's very interesting. So 2 of the guys on the show actually happen to prefer Black women, and the show would not let them bring home Black women, and they screened it out.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So that was, I clocked that recently, and I was oh, well, that would have changed, I think, a lot of the perceptions behind those people on that show if they had actually been allowed to be their authentic selves.
Yeah, 100%. But what they did show of them is very, I would say, typical of Staten Island going to the Jersey Shore. And it's little things culturally that are a little different between North and South Jersey, I'd have to say. Our accent, I totally have a Philly accent. Everyone likes to call this out on me. Even when I've lived here in New York for way longer than I ever lived in Jersey. So that was first what I thought of it. A second type of place I really thought about, Buffy, to an extent, the Hellmouth. But I actually was building into a lot of lore of New Jersey itself. Because what a lot of people don't realize is the island, over in Ocean City and Wildwood, you usually have to go over a bridge. So it's almost like a little island in and of itself. And Ocean City was founded by missionaries, Christian missionaries. And I found that to be really fascinating. And with Wildwood, there's actually a connection to the Jersey Devil and to the New Jersey Net. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of the New Jersey Net. It's kind of like the Bermuda Triangle.
Oh,
and there's
cool.
there's a lot
of fun lore all around that. I've done a little bit of research because I looked into the Jersey Devil for a bit there.
I know about the Jersey Devil.
That's a whole nother episode of conspiracy I would love to talk about.
I've never heard of the Net, though. That sounds cool.
Yeah, the New Jersey Net is a series of where ships and people have actually gone missing, and where the sea has actually pulled people out because of the undertow, which can get really strong at times, and people have died. So that was kind of the invention, but also I kept thinking about as the series was supposed to go on, and you never know if it will or something else will happen. New Jersey actually has, and also this is culturally like how I grew up too. There's a lot of things with Santeria that happens that, really the Santero that goes on in there. So there's a lot of myth and legends and modern thing about covens being there and, the supernatural and occult. So that's kind of what inspired why I wanted to set it there. Plus, like the name Wildwood, I just think really it also kind of sets the tone.
Yeah, no, agree. Well, and now that I know it's actually a real place, that kind of like is going to reframe a few of my later questions, but that's good to know. So what I saw like as influences when I was reading it, it definitely gave me True Blood vibes in how like there's a lot of these various mystical forces from across a cultural spectrum all in this little town. Especially like I think towards the later seasons of True Blood when you really started getting into the brujeria and the other things that were coming into the show. So I thought that was influence. And this one is like a personal one. I don't know if anyone else knows this series, but there was a series called Beautiful Creatures. It was like a YA series. And I really saw like that in Wildwood, especially with the adults having had their own adventures and their own shit that they're keeping up, and they're trying to hide it from the youth, but the youth are getting sucked in by the adults past anyway. Like that to me, I was like, ooh, this feels like so much like Beautiful Creatures.
It's interesting because I've read that series and I've read True Blood. So I think this kind of also goes back to like my canon episodes when I'm like, I don't know if I touch upon the things that I'm reading. So a lot of it is really, I think, intuitive. And to me, I really think a lot about legacy and how like our family and the way we grew up influences us so much. And what do we honor and then what do we break? What do we know about what's unhealthy that we break, but also what are things are honored? Because through the whole point of the series, it was, the parents had a whole other adventure, and now the kids are, and basically as the series evolved, we would have gotten into what this actually means.
Yeah, and I definitely saw that as like a heavy theme in the issues that we did get. So okay, so my next question was going to be what were your biggest challenges in creating Wildwood? But now that I know Wildwood is a real place, I'm going to reframe that question and say like, what was your biggest challenge in translating the real Wildwood into a supernatural Wildwood in Vessel?
Can I just say that's a really good question?
I think I have the moderator thing down reasonably well.
I think
damn, Brent.
Nailed it.
I think the challenges are kind of visually getting the place, and like Sebastian did a really great job with this because I sent him tons of pictures. Actually, he saw pictures that no one else has seen from when I was a kid. And the boardwalk is a very Jersey thing. And like when you're a kid, you don't realize that. Like, we didn't really go on family vacation. So the shore was like our vacation, just because, we were pretty poor at a lot of times. So like going to the Jersey Shore, even if it was a day trip, was like a big thing. And even within the boardwalk, I mean, I would love for all of us actually to go down there one summer together because I could show you so many things that no one else would know unless you literally grew up here, and it's really interesting how the city's evolved, like, especially knowing how white it used to be. And there's these little like social cues that unless you grew up in the Jersey Shore or like you just have been there so much and you understand a lot of the history, that would fly through a lot of people's heads. So I think the challenge was visually capturing it, but also like in those 10 episodes, I really wanted to get a place that on the surface looked fun and it's a beach town, but under the underside, there's like this insidiousness that runs rampant.
So that's perfect segue into like I want to ask you next. So Wildwood's not a huge city, right? And I think with like urban fantasy, you get very different vibes when that urban fantasy is like in a smaller town versus like in the big city. So when you were like, well, I guess for the audience too, and probably for me, like how many people would you actually say is in Wildwood, and like how did the size of Wildwood play into how you structured the world building, like, and how you chose to reveal details about the world?
So, okay, there is about, during the wintertime, about 5,000 people, because it is a coastal town that depends on seasons. But then when it actually is, during the summertime, I think it's around like 35,000 people. So it goes from 5,000 to 35,000. So what Wildwood is during the winter months versus the summer is also radically different. So I would say it was really kind of creating a small town feel, but it like the locals, the people who live there year round pretty much know a lot of each other, but it's still spread out enough where not everyone knows everyone, and certain people don't want to know other people. This is where like economically and racially things get really interesting within the county, because you're usually going to school with not just kids in the town, but in the county. So there's Cape May County, and Atlantic City is part of that. So Atlantic City, besides what you see on the casinos, is pretty economically depressed.
That actually, see, and I love that, like that little detail about seasonal population growth isn't always something that everyone thinks about when they're like creating these kind of worlds or translating them. Marshall, I see you got something over there.
No, I just wanted to add to kind of what I think Will, I think you did a good job in capturing that. I've lived in a small town like my whole life, and like where I live now is on the coast. It's about in city limits, probably about 5,000-6,000 people. But in the greater area, it's about 20 something. So, but it balloons more in the summer. So we've got all these people coming for the state parks and everything else. And like the downtown has a distinctly different vibe, like in the summer, like when we have events going on versus the winter when it's just freaking downpour and nobody wants to come here. You know what I mean? So I think capturing that in a web comic I think that's awesome. I think it's really good. So
thanks.
I commend you for that, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
But the fact that everybody knows everybody is integral to that small town kind of feel too. You know what I mean?
Do you know what's interesting though? I don't feel like New York is so big because I've lived here so long, right?
Yeah,
like it feels like also it can be very community oriented. My job especially is very small in a lot of ways, which is a good and bad thing. I think what New York is similar to is we get a lot of people who are transient. There's a lot of people who aren't like lifelong New Yorkers. In fact, like even when you meet people who grew up here, I'm always like, oh my gosh, you're a unicorn. But now I think about it, like I moved here when I was 17 years old. I literally graduated high school and the next day I moved to New York. So this is more my home than where I grew up, So I think getting into the mindset of a small town isn't as difficult as I thought it would be. Because me and like woods and remote areas, I'm like, that's a murder town.
And when you come here, when you finally visit me, you will see that it is beautiful.
I'm sure it's beautiful, but murder. No, kidding. I'm kidding.
Sure. There'll be murders.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. And I wonder if part of that is because like you build your own universe of familiarity. And so like it stops feeling as big because you have your routines and you have the people that you know, and you have the people that you even know the people that they know to some degree. And because I think San Diego is the same way. A lot of us all joke that this is a beach town trying to pretend to be a city. Because it's like we all run into people. It's like, how do I run into you so often and this city has 1 million people in it? Like it doesn't make sense. But I think because you build your routines in your universe in a way, and you kind of run into the same people. Because I'll do this thing sometimes. I'll just drive around the city, and I'm like, I've never actually seen this part of the city before. Like, wow, I've lived here almost 10 years, and this is a part of the city I've never even been to. And so I think of that in terms of like world building too. It's like people can exist in a place and be there for a long time and still find new things to discover about it.
Yeah, I feel like it's like that in New York in different ways, or sometimes you're not in a certain area because, I'll use like the East Village. I used to live in the East Village, but I tend to only go there a lot of times for work, and then sometimes I have to remind myself like, oh my gosh, this is in the East Village, because I like the neighborhoods that I like. But sometimes it's like when I go to the East Village intentionally to go out or go out to one of my favorite restaurants I haven't eaten yet, I'm like, oh, things are old and new at the same time because things are popping up. And that's really similar to the way that the Jersey Shore is kind of going, because when you have the boardwalk, you have like all of the piers with all the rides. And in Wildwood, there's 3 piers. A lot of creepy things have happened since I was a kid there. A lot of things, like one year, and this is a terrible story, but someone was lit on fire.
Oh.
Yeah. A group of kids literally lit someone on fire.
Jesus.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of things that happen, and a lot of it.
Talking about my town? You're talking about the woods?
Listen, I'm just letting you know. I know there's some creepiness where you're at. So it's interesting. And the funny thing is where I grew up was the projects. We were getting blamed because we were the riffraff coming down because we were experiencing things. And the funny thing is most of the people who did like terrible things all came from the nice motherfucking neighborhoods. Okay? It was not us.
Well, yeah. And I think, there's something to be said, I think. And I think there's something to be said about challenging that kind of stuff in our work, basically. Like not letting the usual statements about like community and who comes from where and what they do, like kind of just stand unchallenged. So, so that's something I noticed in Vessel too. Like there was definitely a lot of like, in subtle ways, pushbacks against like the way that we view certain people and where they come from and what value they bring to the table. So
yeah.
Well, so in that vein, and this next question kind of comes out of my own, I guess, world building philosophy in a way. So like whenever I create any setting, like there's always so much more of it that I create than that actually ends up on the page, because I need to see. I can't write about San Diego unless I figure out what all of California looks like. So I guess so my question to you is so is there other places outside of Wildwood that you've thought about and how it plays into the larger world of Vessel? Because we have things like, we have things like angels, we have things like witches, we have this magic. So outside of Wildwood, have you thought about like how these different types of magics exist in other cities or in other places?
So I kept thinking about this when we were doing the episode, because I'm always like, I don't know how I'm world building. I don't really think things. And then I realize I do. And the things I think about are 2 things. And this is the only thing I think about when I actually sit down and create a world, is power and place. Who has the power? Where's the place? And what is their place within the power structure?
You are in good company, because I believe that is the question that there's another author who asks that question, and it's either Sui or Tochi. I can't remember which one, but it's one of those 2. So you're in good company with that as your world building question.
Because like to me, and this is another thing I did think about, like as I was going through the way that magic works. And the magic works to me in a way that is culturally, right? And think about technology, the way technology evolved. There were, at certain points, people were developing technology at the same time that never interacted with each other. And the idea that the Europeans were the modern plumbing and technology actually isn't true. We actually saw it. I'm going to say I'll put the link in the notes because I have it written down in one of my notebooks. But there was a empire in South Africa around the 1400s that was eons ahead of modern plumbing, modern road planning, and everything. And then when archaeologists discovered it it's called the Manawapampan tribe. It's such a long word. I'm going to kill it. But basically what happened is in the turn of the 20th century, archaeologists who came and saw it was oh, Europeaners must have been there, right? So they took their lens of colonization and said this only could have happened because of this. And in turn, not until about 1995 did archaeologists actually relook at it and was actually, no, they existed and had all the things before we did. And I learned this, and I took a history of Africa course, and it covered almost all of the countries and the way technology arose and the way colonization affected it. But it actually even went into more detail about pre-colonization. And I kept thinking about myths, legends, and the way things work. To me, magic is also about culture. So it would make sense that there would be multiple ways to go about magic. And this also goes back to my art background. There's multiple ways to make art. And culturally, everyone has similarities, but then there's these really cool differences. For my life drawing class, instead of being centered on the way the Greek looked at the figure, I was actually taught the way that West Africa looked at the figure as my foundation for drawing. And it's different proportions, but it's similar in a lot of ways. So when I was building up the story for the vessel, I kept thinking all of these different magic systems could exist, right? And it could be really based on your place in the world and your access to it. And also, where are you in the power structure of society? So as the series was going on, we were going to see multiple different ways of magic. And then how is this actually working in union? Because I kept thinking also of physics, because there is certain string theories that binds everything together, even though things look completely apart. So that's kind of how I think of it.
So that's interesting. So with Wildwood, it's pretty much that was the only locale you actually thought about, though. You didn't think about how oh, there's vampire gangs in New York, or there's
Actually, no. So I wrote 157 scripts already.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
And I already knew, and I don't know how, I just knew it. I wrote all these scripts, but even from the get-go, I knew New York was going to play a big part into what's happening. So was a part of France, and I was starting to do a lot of research into South Africa, just because I'd been there, and I was really influenced by the culture, pre-colonization, and plus my class in college. So everything was going to be interconnected in how these things played a part, because and then there was another world. So it's called Vessel, a Nocturnal Realm series, because the Nocturnal Realm is actually a real place where a lot of this was going to stem from and bleed into our world.
Ah, okay. Cool. So okay. See, because I was feeling there was as I was reading, I was okay, there is definitely, just by the existence of the angel alone, I was there's definitely a much broader spectrum of things happening out there in this universe. So I'm glad my inkling of a suspicion was correct.
Yeah.
So okay, so you kind of mentioned how you think of magic it's definitely connected to culture and whatnot. So in Vessel we kind of see like we see a couple of different systems that are kind of like all existing at the same time. How so when you were like thinking about how to reveal each system, what were you doing to not necessarily, I guess, differentiate them, right? Because like, you know, I think sometimes audiences who aren't as educated on something won't know the difference between, like, for instance, voodoo and hoodoo. Like they'll think that they're the same thing and they're not. And so yeah, what was your thought process in like introducing these different magic systems without fetishizing them or making them feel like tokens?
Well, for me, everything comes down to character. And I know you've mentioned this before, Brent, but I just said this to Nick the other night. I was like, oh God, I really do have like this emotional core to my stories. Like everything tends to be really like about emotion and character, right? So the idea of what I wanted to play with, and I'll probably do this in a lot of my works now, is everything is being introduced by these teenagers with the adults sprinkling in their version of events. So the way I was trying not to make it tokenism is that the kids were going to explore this as the series went on. And I thought a lot about Christianity in the way that there's all these different perspectives of being the one true Christianity. And the bottom line is a lot of it actually gets away with from what Jesus actually talked about, right? It's all these perceptions. And then I kept thinking of like my own faith that I practice, which is Buddhism, and about the different ways that Buddhists have brought in Buddhism, right? Which is also complicated and, you know, sometimes wrong too. So I kept thinking, I don't need to set in the beginning these strict standards. I need to do everything through the kids' eyes, and then the adults can have their opinions and influence. But like all of us, like when we're kids, we're questioning, hopefully you're questioning. And my thought process was, I definitely don't think about religion the same way that my parents do. Or even, you know, some of my siblings, like I definitely don't have that opinion as I've been more educated, as I've seen more. And some of it's, I had the wrong opinions as I grew older, right? Meaning like, I started to learn like, you know, not everyone's Catholic, not everyone's Christian because you're in this small thing. So with Lauren, one of the characters who is a witch, she was actually going to learn her type of magic that is specific to her town and herself, and then go from there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, I think that's smarter just because like it's true, especially now that I know Wildwood's a real place. Like I think that just adds even more to like the necessity to kind of like create that nuance in it. Cause I mean, I'm still reading it, but I'm reading this biography of like one of the Roman emperors that like tried to bring back paganism, and the challenges with the early church and how like they did not get along, and like all these people had these very different ideas. And growing up, like I didn't think that at all. I thought like, oh, they all came together with one accord after Jesus died and they got it all figured out, and like it's been the same way ever since. Like that's the way they kind of make you think when you're growing up, and then you learn stuff. So I thought that was I think that to me was like when I was reading Vessel, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. He's definitely very in tune with the teenager perspective, and he's setting it up in the right way by like having them challenge these preconceptions about their world. So yeah, I thought that was cool. Oh, so yes, that actually makes me think about like sort of the supplement. I guess, well, not supplement because it's integral, but the blog pieces, like the
I love those.
yeah. So what made you think of doing that, and kind of like how do you feel like that did it help with the world building, or did it create any challenges for you? Or
No, the blog post was just really hilariously fun. It was a way that we could, in between episodes, just do these little fun things and put it on Instagram. It was really like just a thing me and Sebastian thought of. And the reason I wanted to do it is because of Izzy's character is not superpowered, right? And I think a lot of times, and this is where I thought of Buffy specifically, because Xander the whole time is like the everyman, right? And what I wanted to do is Izzy's going to have, as the series went on, Izzy's going to have not just as a perspective as being non-powered, but as a first generation, as a woman of color, and she is going to she's going to go against the grain of tradition of what her parents grew up with, but also what the town was thinking of her place in the power structure of society. So this was someone who was going to really push the boundaries and question things. And it was just hilarious to get into her voice because she's kind of like, she is the news. That's how I was kind of going it. Like she was like getting to the nitty gritty. And I was really inspired by this one movie that came out on Netflix a couple years called The Bronx versus, or The Vampires versus Bronx, which I love. It is one of the best shows ever. Everyone should watch it. And it deeply reminds me of how I grew up.
And you said this is on Netflix for the audience?
Yeah. It is on Netflix still. I could watch it every single day. That's how much I love it.
Oh wow!
You know, it's funny you say Xander for Izzy because I see that, but who I see more is and I can't remember her name now, but old girl's character from Scream.
Oh, I think I know who you're talking about, but I forget her name.
The reporter, but like, yeah,
Courtney
like
Cox's character.
Yeah, it's Courtney Cox's character. I can't think of her name right now, but I thought of
Sydney.
her. Sydney.
Sydney?
No, Sydney's the main one. Sydney's the main
Sydney's
character.
Nev Campbell. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't remember her name. Apologies to the horror fans out there, but it reminded me of her, but in a less messy way.
Mm-hmm.
Like she was definitely more on the side of the protagonist because like as much as I love Xander, there were so many times like he just felt completely useless. So I don't get useless from Izzy. Izzy is like she's in the mix. Like she's like you're not gonna leave me on the sidelines, and I'm not gonna whine about the fact that I don't have these gifts that my friends have. Like I have gifts of my own, and I'm gonna use them.
Yeah. Oh, good. I'm glad that came across because that's exactly what I wanted her to be. Because I wanted her to think like I kind of the whole role of her as the series was going to go on is she actually was kind of like the Professor X of this group because she's going to be thinking on multiple levels ahead of time. She's going to be the ones who's going to be like, well, why don't you try to do this? Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like she more than anyone was actually going to have one of like be the core people.
Just so people don't get upset. It's Gale Weathers. Gale Weathers.
Oh, gotcha.
Gale Weathers.
Core
people.
Right.
I did not fail. Marshall did not fail you. He found the name. Gale Weathers. So, because StokerCon is in San Diego like next week, and I don't need the horror community coming after me.
You'll be all mad.
Not do it.
Yeah. So, but yeah, no, I see the Xander comparison, but I think that she has a little more take charge attitude than him. There were just so many times where I just was like, ugh, he's just useless. Get him off the screen.
He's so whiny too sometimes.
Whiny, always whining. Like he was
Buffy.
He was the biggest baby. But all right, Marshall, you can go jump in on Xander hate train.
No. I was gonna go somewhere else. I was gonna go back to the magic thing real quick, since you guys were about to go on a tangent for a minute.
We were.
Yeah, but that's okay. I have a question just about like, I know we talked about it with Brent too. Like, we only have a certain amount of this right now, this world that we've seen that you've made, which is awesome. Are there magic systems that aren't present in this portion that we have that you have in the back of your mind, or extensions of the ones that are there that you could maybe tell us a little bit about? Just something that, because you know how you build things that are bigger and you have to kind of pare it down. I know we talked about that with Brent stuff.
Yeah, no. Yeah, there's a whole entire werewolf community that was coming into play.
Oh shit.
There's definitely vampires. And I was actually going to talk a lot about like necromancy and the way that the dead actually move, and also a lot of things about spirits and ghosts, which I would say I'm taking more from my personal experience and my oh god, I don't know if I want to say this, but my own intuitiveness about what I've been through. All in the means of like a teenage drama and asking like, pretty deep questions about what is the truth, and and really a lot of like magic within the cult, the way of the truth. And then there was going to be there was going to be another kind of there was another kind of cult, or what we think is a cult, called The Truth is the Way. Okay. So it would play a lot of like opposites, right? And I keep thinking about, I went to Catholic school, so I think I'm really thinking a lot about religion and how manipulative it can be.
Yeah.
But also sometimes how like for certain people it can be really beautiful. It's not about knocking someone's down. It's like sometimes if it brings you to a place of peace and love and it makes you more expressive, then it's not bad. But a lot of times it's manipulative as fuck. So
yeah, someone that went to Catholic school, I'm with you on that.
Yeah, it's just you see everything. So we had vampires, werewolves, zombies, necromancers. I had a whole thing going into fairies, but actually like the Fae, the Unseelie and Seelie Court. I had spin-offs planned for I had 5 series spin-off of what I wanted to do with the webcomic. One of them was going to be called Spellcasters. It was actually about Lauren actually coming to New York, because there's a reason for it. There was Alpha and Omega, which was about the werewolves. So yeah, I got stories for days, y'all. Days.
I mean, well, and that kind of like just answered the next thing I was going to ask, because the hypothetical I was going to ask you is like, it's Vessel issue 50. What does issue 50 look like? But you've kind of given us a good scope of what would be coming.
I can tell you what episode 50 would look like because I wrote it.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
Because at the end of the season, which really the end of the season would be episode 52, we're starting to learn about what happened to Jen, who is Deanna's girlfriend, the night of the storm. And then what happens at the end of episode 52 was going to basically everything that you thought was happening is completely flipped on its head.
Ooh.
So okay. There's a lot of plot twists. And then I had season 2. I've already had season 2 written out pretty much. And then going into Spellcasters and how I would actually want to like evolve Lauren.
All right. Well, I saw Nick and then I think Marshall, so I'm going to let them.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Nick. Okay, so I have a question because I think you do a really, really good job of representation and things like that. And I'm really curious when it comes to the magic building side of is like how deep, if you will, does cultural magic have a play in this?
Deep. It's kind of asking an artist, how well does your culture play into your art? It just is. It just does. And sometimes you don't know how your culture is going to play in. So let's take, for example, an artist who I like deeply love is Kehinde Wiley, right? Kehinde Wiley did Obama's portrait. Kehinde Wiley is a fine artist painter. And when you look at his paintings, what it really is a discussion of is about Blackness and history. He takes these very typical Renaissance poses and puts the everyday Black man and Black woman in those poses and paints them in their modern day clothes. right? So culture is just going to come out. But am I trying to pigeonhole it? And just to Brent's point about being tokenism, no, because I think the way I think about my culture is the difference than the way my mom thinks about it. And there's going to be similarities, but like it's always going to be a little bit different. And to me, magic is about evolution and about also to an extent inconsistency, right? You put a group of artists in a room to draw one person, every single work is going to look different. Even though we all have the same basic understanding of shape, tone, and color, right? Because through our eyes and through our own experiences, we're funneling what we see. And that's beautiful. And that is the same thing for me to be magic. Everyone's going to have a different way to look about things. And neither one's better or worse. It all depends on who's in power, who deems it appropriate or deems it worthy. Because if you look at Renaissance artists, they were considered the almighty because they were so realist. But modern art has moved away from that because it's not about making things real. It's looking at the world through your eyes and what are you creating with it. And I think that is the power that magic can actually talk about in story.
I like that. And thank you for tying that back down to it depends on who's in power. That was actually going to be my follow-up question for you. So you answered it. Thank you.
Thank you, Marshall.
So I don't know. When you were talking about some of the plans you had, when you talked about episode 50 and spin-offs and stuff like that, I don't know. I always have, whether I write them down or not, I have all these other ideas for a project I'm working on. Like, oh, I could do this with this character, this with this character. And I know you, and I know that you literally have this stuff written down somewhere. But I guess what I'm asking is, we haven't really talked about, and I know in a future episode we probably will, like, I don't know, the future of Vessel and what you plan to do with it, or if it's, going to remain where it is for now. But like, is there another medium that you would want to take these stories if it couldn't be a webcomic? Since you have these other ideas, or is it kind of because of the visual aspect of it and the way you envisioned it, is it webcomic, webtoon for all time?
For life.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen with it because I obviously have stories to tell. My biggest thing, though, is because it was so culturally diverse, and this is kind of what the idea that me and Sebastian, like I was talking to him with, like when I did Spellcasters, which is centered around Lauren, I actually wanted to bring on a Black artist and a writer, right? Like to me, like for example, like writing my play has been really interesting and powerful because it's about collaboration. And I think sometimes there's something really beautiful about collaborating. And like right now I'm working on a comic book with me and RJ are actually, and it's really interesting because while we're so similar, we're so different in the way that we think about story and the way that like we go about things, and I think RJ is very structured and I'm structured in a whole different way. And I really believe this is because of like my background in art, because I'm a feeler, so, and sometimes people can be very like, okay, well, this needs to happen. And to me, a lot of things are about intuitiveness. So I would maybe write a book and then a comic book and then a pilot for a script. I think I learned this on this one podcast. What I want to do with my stuff is have multiple streams of revenue off of one project and in different mediums. Yeah. So my play is going to be a play. We can pitch it as a movie. We can pitch it as a limited series. I could maybe write it as a book. I don't think I can though, just because, not because I don't think I can do it, but it was very emotional just to write it as a play. I could write it as a screenplay because it would be a little bit easier emotionally, or or like pitch it as a series, because I wouldn't be the only writer, so that's what would make it a little easier.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think we'll see what happens.
So I think that's interesting how you talked about that you are the being a visual artist plays into like how you build your worlds at first, because I think you're absolutely right. I think everyone builds their worlds differently and in a different order because of like their personal experiences, their background, the things that the things that interest them first. So yeah, I think the how you're saying like you're a filler and you like to just fill it out. I think that I think that plays well, especially in building characters, because like I think you can kind of I mean, and I've said this before, but I think that's where you can get to that emotional core and kind of like I feel like with Vessel the world was revealed around people's emotions around it. Like it wasn't revealed based on someone, I don't know, cracking open a history book. It was revealed because like this person pissed me off and now I'm remembering this thing that happened, and this thing that I'm remembering happened actually reveals something about magic in the world. So I think, yeah, I think to your point, I think because you are you rely on the intuition and the visual and the emotional, that's how your worlds kind of unfurl in your stories.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually a really good observation, Brent. Because I think you're the first one that pointed it out of the emotional intelligence Will has in his writing and how everything in is inherently emotional. So I have a question for you here. When it comes to, because we've had conversations before where you're like, I don't look at world building, right? As much as other stuff. Does this experience change that for you, knowing that you do world build, but you do it through the lens of an emotional response for your characters and things like that? Does that change your opinion of your own writing or anything like that?
No, I don't know. Sometimes I like don't know what I'm doing until you guys ask me these damn questions. Like
It's
I
so
am
nice
always,
having you in the hot seat, buddy. I love this.
Yeah, this is awesome.
I'm always amazed, like when I hear Brent talk about world building and like reading, his stuff, and then Nick, you because like I think of you guys as like you think down about the world, like when I hear Brent talk about like how he world builds, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so smart. And like, I don't think I'm that smart. Like, I don't think of it that way. But I also think I internalize so many things. And because I read like so much, this is where like I have to write things out. And then I can go back in and be like, and really think about it. But with the vessel, I've had this idea in my head for so long, I didn't really think about certain world building stuff. It just was in there, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense, but I'm also going to flip it a little bit with what you said. I appreciate you feeling like it's smart, but for my end, and I think I think this is the eternal struggle of writing. And you will always see something that another writer does and be like, "Damn, I wish I could do it like that," or "Oh, I wish that I could do that." Because like when you talk about how you're able to just like go for it and get in there and like start crafting the story, part of me is like, ugh, I wish I could just like dive in and like actually just get to the point and start drafting. Like for me, it's like, I'll try to do it. Like it's not like I haven't tried to do it. I've tried to do it where like I'm like, you know what, I'm just gonna go for it and start like trying to draft it, and my brain just will not let me move to until I actually sit there and do all that pre-work. So I think yeah, to your point, I think like I would say yours is just a different type of validity. There's a different type of intelligence that goes into it, because you're able to just get into the story. Like you don't have to sit there and buy a bunch of groceries and try to figure out like what the hell you're going to cook. You already know what you're cooking and you can just get started. And like, cause your pantry's already full. Like me, I gotta turn the car on. I gotta go to the grocery store. I gotta buy the shit. I gotta come back home and be like, I bought too much of this. I don't know. And yeah. So I think it's just a different way of doing things.
For sure. That's hilarious. Go ahead, Nick.
I like the conversation because it's like I know how Brent world builds, and now we're seeing how like you do it, Will, and I would say like if for those that are listening, like there's so many different ways that you can do world building. Brent is definitely a heavy end world builder before he gets to the story. Marshall, you're more like that too, aren't you?
Yeah, for the most part. I once I have an idea, I basically start kind of figuring out what the world looks like before I get too crazy. But yeah, I'm somewhere in between, I'd say.
Yeah, and I'm in talking with Will with my current project and kind of unraveling this conversation, right? Like I world build by how my main character reacts to the world around them and how they can use the world to accomplish their objectives, which puts me in a pinch because now I have to go back and redo some world building elements to match there. But well, I just find it really interesting that you do it similar to me, but it's an emotional response to the world.
So
and that's like really fascinating because it just deepens the character.
Well, I think, okay. You know, I talked about this on the podcast. I was working on a sci-fi heist novel, right? But now I completely thought that through and I'm like not doing it as a heist. I know exactly what I'm doing at it now. And the problem was when I was writing it, I kept saying, why is this so like, I didn't have writer's block. I almost had like writer's anxiety, like about getting there to write and like, oh, can I do this? And then something else clicked. And it was, the story was really about my own issue of abandonment and like having to leave home so young and being close with my siblings, but also worlds apart. So that is the new emotional core of that sci-fi heist novel. It's changing radically. And that's because I needed to and I switched characters of actually point of view who I'm talking to, because I kept asking myself, if I'm having a problem, this is what I'm learning about my process right now anyway. I need to have a really strong emotional core because it's usually something I'm grappling with and then also what's going on in the world right now. And my opinion on about a lot of the reason like we have war and has a lot to do with like power and ego and actually not seeing how we're deeply connected to each other. You know, so I try to let that, I'm trying to let that like play out in a lot of my work. Like the new short story I'm going to submit soon has a very strong emotional core.
So you actually walk right into what would have been my last question. So with everything that you did in the building of the world of Vessel, how does that, or what do you think that you're carrying from it into your future projects? Like what lessons did you come across? Which things that you learned about yourself that surprised you? Anything like that you're carrying with you into future projects?
My default emotion is anger, which can be used as a really great weapon. And also to really make sure that not all my characters are going to get along. And it makes things really interesting. And I think what I really wanted to try and capture is just because you disagree with the people you love with doesn't mean you don't love them. But you sometimes think that their logic and where they're coming from is deeply flawed. And sometimes life, as a kid, you start to work out. And sometimes that's going to either eventually bring you closer because then you're going to understand someone else's point of view, or that person is fundamentally just so far off. And that's when you have to reassess, like, I can't even be friends with this person. And that is another type of grief and heartbreak.
Ha, yes. Okay. I could go more. I could go, but we gotta wrap up here. So This was a great episode again to talk to Will about world building and with Vessel, which we all hope will continue in some shape or form in the future. But if not, you all got at least a little bit a taste of what would have came down the road. So, I mean, if anything, I feel like you all should be like hitting Will's inbox, asking him to keep going in some way, shape, or form.
Do it.
But yeah, thank you, Will, for this great conversation. I think we all really enjoyed it.
Amazing. Thank you.
And this has been Just Keep Writing, a podcast for writers, by writers, to keep you writing. You can find us at justkeepwriting.org. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Feel free to reach out to any of us on our social medias, and please jump in our Just Keep Writing Discord channel. Links to all of that is in the show notes. Lastly, please support our show by going to patreon.com/justkeepwriting. We offer daily writing prompts, early access to podcast episodes, and much more. Thanks for listening, and just keep writing.